There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Mikiko is back. Mikiko, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Mikiko is my most globe-trottingest correspondent for Bite Size Book Chat. She is just a modern miracle. Have you read the Olga Tokarczuk book about travel? What is it called? Flights?
No, I haven't. But
well, you're such a travel meister. You should read it. It doesn't sound like a Sean book, but I think it might be a Mikiko book.
There you go. I have to stop adding books to my TBR because of your videos. It's just...
No, you don't. No, you don't. It's the whole reason for my existence, Mikiko.
It is. I actually watched your recommendations of short books yesterday. So
short but not sweet. Yep.
Short but not sweet. Yeah.
So we're here to talk about an Irish novel that just came out at the very end of November. So, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It's a novel, right?
It's a short. Yeah, it's a short novel.
It's a novella.
Short. Yes.
It's one of those short but not sweet works of fiction.
Yeah.
We have both looked at the Goodreads synopsis, and it doesn't reveal very much. So we're not going to reveal any more than is in the Goodreads synopsis. So tell us about this book within those restrictions, Mikiko.
Okay. Well, the reason I have an advanced reader's copy of it, which is why I was able to read it. And I've read it twice, as I usually do before I come on to chat with you. And it's very short. And it's primarily about this man, Bill Furlong, and he's living in Ireland in, I believe it's New Ross in Wexford, and which is it's the county south of Dublin. It's 1985. It's coming up to Christmas, and I think he's taking a bit of time to kind of think about his life and what he has and what's happening. And I actually had to do a little bit of research. Well, by a little bit of research, I mean, I asked my partner, who is Irish, kind of what the climate was like in Ireland around that time, because there's a lot of focus on how poor people are and what people have and what they don't have, and the kind of difference between the haves and the have-nots, and how that affects Bill and his family. So Bill's married, he has 5 daughters, and so he's surrounded by women, and he is a coal and timber merchant. And it's, his business is doing very well. He's trying to get all of these orders out for Christmas. And in and amongst all of this, the Christmas rush and whatnot, he's starting to think about his own life. And then he's thinking about, his daughters and them growing up, and has he done enough for his kids and whatnot. So it's quite introspective. It's nice in terms of his own kind of understanding of himself. And I think that's, there is a bit of that kind of mystery. What happens when he drops off this, I think it's coal he's taking to the convent. And it's like, what is it that happened? It changes him. It affects him so much that most of the book or most of the story is preoccupied with his actions and how he's been raised. And I think that's really the crux of the story.
He's delivering an order, and it doesn't say what kind of order in the synopsis, but we can say what kind of an order, can't we?
Yeah, it's either coal or timber that he's leaving.
Coal or timber, okay. Yeah, and then he discovers something at the convent that causes this whole thing about his remembering or dealing with his own past, but also like the community.
Yes, absolutely.
And that just totally hooks me.
It's so good, Sean. Because I tend to read books twice before I meet with you, it was so much better the second time. And I think that's because I was reading it for a bit more of enjoyment.
And shall we do War and Peace next time, Mikiko?
I don't think, listen, Margaret Kennedy was enough. That was long enough for me. But I think it's good because it does call into question, what's happening in Ireland at that time, what's happening economically, what's happening politically. And of course, that is tied to, religion, the Catholic Church. And then, also this guy he's on the brink of turning, I think, 40. He really does look to his past, and he does have his own questions about his life, what his upbringing has led him to become. And I think that's the question. It is a bit of a moral story. What do you do when you know something bad is happening and you choose to ignore it? Yeah. And I think that's a really important question, and especially in a lot of cultures where, And I think, obviously, as you've made blatantly clear with a lot of Canadian history, what happens? You become complicit in hiding terrible tragedies. And so he's confronted with something that he knows, something that everybody really knows, but he comes.
Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's dealing with it. And we're talking about, it's not a spoiler to say that we're talking about church stuff, Catholic, Irish stuff, and gender stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we know
more.
because he goes, no. Well, we know he sees something at the convent.
So yeah, you can pretty much.
You can probably make some of your own guesses and assumptions through that.
Would you describe this as a feminist novella?
Yes, I would actually, because I think what Furlong's character, Bill's character, realizes is, first of all, how his daughters are growing and how they're going to be seen by other men. You also see the work that they put into just everything that happens to make their household work. So primarily, what his wife and older daughters are doing. His eldest daughter also helps him at the office and works endlessly. And even on Christmas Eve, he takes his staff out for lunch. And I don't know if she's the owner of the cafe or if she's just running it. They're having this little back and forth exchange at the very end when he's paying for the lunch. And, he says, you've been working really hard. Take some time off. And, you deserve to take some time off. And she kind of laughs at him and says oh, what it must be like to be a man when, holidays actually mean, or time off actually means time off. You don't do anything, when in reality, that's not. I don't think a lot of women think like that. So the character is learning about how women's lives really, really are by virtue of what they're saying and what they're doing and what he sees. So it's quite interesting.
How was the writing? I have to admit that the only thing I've read by Claire Keegan was this short story, individually bound short story called The Forester's Daughter. It was part of the Faber short series for their 90th birthday a couple of years ago, and I hated this story.
Oh no! That's a shame.
But I also think that most writers of fiction are either short story writers or novelists, not both. Yeah. So the fact that I thought it was a pretty awful short story makes me all the more expectant and hopeful about the novel.
Well, and she has won quite a lot of prizes, right? I actually wrote it down because I was really surprised. She doesn't publish very often. That's the other thing as well. Her novels don't come out that frequently. So she only has 4 works. No,
and a couple of them are stories.
Her short story collections have won prizes. Her Walk the Blue Fields actually won the 2008 Edgehill Prize, which is quite a prestigious short story prize.
I have to say that I don't know who was picking the stories for this Faber series or what they were smoking when they picked them, but they have chosen other stories that were terrible by writers that write really good short stories. The Edna O'Brien story was not very good, but she's one of the best short stories writers alive. So yeah, I'm really pissed off at Faber, not necessarily at Claire Keegan, but the story didn't.
Yeah. Well,
I did a review video of this with my friend Doris of Aldi Books, so I'll put a link in the show notes if people want to
please do. Well, she won, what was her last book, Foster? That won a prize. So
I never even heard of it. I see it here, but I had never even heard of it. So.
And I don't know the prize. I've never heard of this award. It's the Davy Byrne.
11 years ago. Yes. So.
Yeah. She doesn't publish that often. I know she is a teacher. She's an MFA. I don't know if she teaches post-secondary or if she teaches secondary. I don't want to say anything, but I know she is a creative writing teacher. Mm-hmm.
And this was your first anything by Claire Keegan, right?
First anything. Yeah.
So Mikiko, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're awesome, and I can't wait to see where you're going to be calling in from next.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to welcome to Bite Size Book Chats, Henk from the Netherlands. Henk, welcome to my channel.
Yes, thanks so much for your invite. It's so good to see you in real life.
It's great to chat with you, and we can't remember exactly who befriended who on Goodreads, but here we are. So you have read a book that I didn't know existed. So you're much more au courant, is that the French expression, than I am. Bernardine Evaristo has a new memoir out, her first nonfiction book published, I believe. It's called Manifesto on Never Giving Up. And I read your review.
Indeed.
It's a fantastic review, and you loved it. So tell us all about it.
Most people will know Bernardine from the Booker Prize joint win of 2019. And indeed, she has already written quite a few fiction books. So I think 6 out of my top of my head. And it is her first non-fiction book. And basically, she talks about how her youth and how her upbringing in England shaped her, how she experienced racism and also responses to her queerness and how she dealt with that. And it's a very positive book. So indeed, the title is already I'll Never Giving Up. And well, she made it in that sense, of course. She got the book her at her 60s. And that really shows that, well, at least that's her message, that you can achieve everything. So it's really quite an uplifting book. Yeah, and I really liked it.
Tell us a little bit about her childhood. She came from a mixed parents that were a mixed race.
So her mother was white and her father came from Nigeria. And like a lot of immigrants, her father didn't really look back at that history. There was really a focus on assimilation, on becoming British, on becoming English in that sense. I didn't know that she grew up in quite a large family. So she has 7 brothers and sisters. So really a bundle of children in that sense. And that also shaped her. Like she's talking about how she's the middle child. And well, of course, if you have so many children, then it's also sometimes a fight for attention and for standing out. And also how that shaped her. And also, well, while going to school, she was one of the few colored people. That gave her an attitude of like, I'm always different, so I better can be myself than trying to adapt or blend in. That's only like the first chapter, really about her youth, her school, her family, but it's really insightful. And you can see links, I think, with like, for instance, Girl, Woman, Other, that has quite a lot of links to her growing up and her becoming an author in that sense.
Do you know where in the UK she grew up?
I think it was a suburb city of London, so
Okay.
It wasn't in the rural countryside, but it wasn't in full in the city either.
Right. And you share in your review a harrowing experience that she had that just shows the presence of racism in her life as a young student.
Talks about how just the other school going girl comes up to her and says like, yeah, I did a survey for apparently some kind of statistic course or social course on the school. And she said like 75% of the people I polled, they didn't want to live beside a colored family. And also Bernardine tells about windows being thrown in of her parental home like once a year or something. She was already like established because she is nowadays a professor and well, an established author, of course. But she also tells about an exchange program where she went to a residence writingship in an Ivy League school. Well, she was also housed there at the premises. And the guards, they just walked up to her, like, because it couldn't be that black female writer would be the writer in residence. So there's a lot of racism in that sense that comes back. But I must say it's also a very uplifting book because she does tell it with a certain humor, and she tells it how she dealt with it and what her response is to it. So it's by no means a very glum book or a book about depression, and makes you think like, oh, there are so many things that just happen casually or kind of casually, but which have large impacts on the person involved. Yeah.
And then as she gets into early adulthood, she is living, she's as a lesbian, as a queer person, and has a lot of same-sex relationships, and she is now partnered with a man. But what was it like to read that part of her life?
It was very interesting. She's very frank about like her sexual identity and how she discovered relationships and what she got from relationships. And I think especially for readers who know Girl, Woman, Other, I think a lot of things come back that you could recognize or might be like modeled based on her life. And yeah, she also tells like a certain relationship with a boy, and because of the way how it broke off, that it really got her thinking about her own sexuality, and that she then well, started off relationship with women as well. And funnily enough, or like as a mirror to it, the last relationship with a woman turned out emotionally abusive as well. And that's certainly something you could remember from Girl, Woman, Other in that sense. It's really a fluid experience in that sense. So those kind of marker events make her think about her sexuality. And that's not something you see often, I think, in books as well, because most of the time it's like really fixed in or maybe just a coming out. This is really, well, it really encompasses her life indeed.
The other thing that in reading your review and reading the synopsis of this memoir that certainly parallels what she wrote about in Girl, Woman, Other is the life of theater, playwright, and other roles in the theater milieu. What stood out about all that for you?
Yeah, so she has indeed a Black Women's Theatre. She founded that herself with some other schoolmates from her theatre education, because from origin, she's not like a writer or a creative writer course, but she's from a theatre background indeed. And that she founded it, this bit of a variant maybe on, there's a quote, of course, about if you don't recognize yourself in the books you would want to read, that you should write it yourself. I think it's from Toni Morrison, if I'm correct.
That sounds like something Toni Morrison would say.
Yeah, and a variant on it, because she noticed when she was in theater school that there were almost no rules for Black persons, and certainly not for Black women. And that's why she founded a theater company just focusing on that and making avant-garde plays where, well, Black persons, where people of color were celebrated and could find experience in acting. That was really uplifting, and like from the writing of plays, that also got her like into writing poetry, and you see her journey as a writer very clearly from that. So the dialogues that she wrote, at least from the books I've read till now, you see it's very natural, and you kind of could hear it, and I think that's also maybe partly due to her theater background.
I loved Girl, Woman, Other, and I find her quite fascinating. So I will definitely be checking this memoir out. Would you call it a memoir?
Yeah, I think so. It's like loosely, there's several chapters, and they're all loosely based on her life. And it's really personal. It's really, you get to know her in a sense. I think it's out in October in the UK. So I think the publication date for US is in January next year.
Well, thank you so much, Henk. I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Sarah Hope is back, and she is here to sell me on a book by a writer that I didn't think I would like. So this is going to be fun. The novel, which just came out we're taping this on October 12th. It just came out September 21st, I believe.
Yeah.
Has a fabulous title and cover. The title is The Wrong End of the Telescope. The author is Rabih Alameddine, who is an Arab-American novelist. And the book I read, I do this page 112 test with books. I read page 112 and to see if I get along with the writing. And it was an unnecessary woman. And I just didn't care for that page. So your task, should you choose to accept it, is to convince me that I need to give this one a try, because it does sound really fascinating.
Oh, I will give it my best shot. And especially because I think this book, it's shown up on some of the reviews of books to look for this fall, but it has not been getting the press that a lot of other titles are. And it deserves much, much more coverage and much more praise than it's getting. It's set on the island of Lesbos, interestingly enough, where Syrian refugees are arriving by boat. The central character is a trans woman who identifies as lesbian, who's been asked by another trans woman friend who identifies as straight, although this has pretty much nothing to do with the plot, but everything to do with the people, to come to Lesbos and provide her services as a doctor to this refugee community that the friend is working with.
Wow. Okay. You've already sold me. But keep going. But oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Okay. So next thing is that there's a character called the writer in the book, or the author, who's a gay man who shows up intending to be a volunteer and finds that he just can't do it. When he doesn't have the journalistic distance between himself and the refugees, he just shuts down. He can't handle it. And so the premise underlying this book is that he's asked Mina, the central character, to write about their time on the island because he simply can't. He has no words for it, and he spent most of his time there in his hotel room. So that makes it very interesting. Mina's telling the story in first person, but there are a number of passages that use second person. You'll remember, or we did this on that night. And at first they're a little bit distancing, but once you get to know the characters, it makes you feel like you're part of that group. It's an inclusive second person after a bit.
Very interesting.
Mina has been rejected by her family, has immigrated to the US. She has one brother who has accepted her as Mina, and he comes to Lesbos as well to see her there because they see each other very, very rarely. He's got his own issues. He's divorced. His wife has moved to Dubai with their children. Everyone in this book is complicated.
Yeah.
And complicated in ways that are wonderful because Alameddine presents them all as just these very ordinary people in a way, which they of course are, but they're not who a lot of readers would put on their initial list of who are ordinary people.
In your review, you use the word intersectionality.
Intersectionality. So Mina, our central character, trans woman, lesbian, originally from Lebanon, immigrated to the US, rejected by family. She's an MD. She's been in a 30-year lesbian relationship with one of her medical school friends who is a Haitian immigrant to the US and is a psychiatrist. There's just all kinds of things happening there. And most of the characters have backgrounds that complicated. I really enjoy that none of the characters have to be one thing and nothing else.
Now, one of the things is I'm listening to you, and this is not based on my reading that one page at all, it's just listening to this very complex story is, do you get to know and care about, do you get invested in the characters?
You do. And what helps with that is the additional timeline there, which is there's a parallel storyline about a Syrian family that lands on the beach the first day that Mina's there to provide help as a physician. And so you see Mina and the other characters interacting with this family. You hear the family story. And over time, what you realize is that the mother is dying of liver cancer. And she has been trying to hide that from the whole family so that they could get out of Syria. And now they're out of Syria and she is exhausted and she's ready to let go. And the challenge is for her to be allowed to let go, for her family to be able to embrace that and not feel like it's, destroying their whole refugee experience right at the very beginning. And it's very, very powerful. And there are really emotionally rich relationships that this woman has with some of the workers at this refugee center, including Mina, that make her sympathetic, but also add to how sympathetic they are.
Yeah, no, it sounds really. So I didn't care for the prose on the one page I read. How would you describe the writing, or what did you think of the writing in this book?
The writing is stripped down.
Mm-hmm.
It's unembellished. It gives a lot of detail, but it gives detail in this non-ornate way. You have to adjust yourself to that kind of prose style. In a way, it's close to journalistic, although you see interior lives and emotional relationships that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Okay, interesting. Well, I am definitely going to give it a try. Do you follow him on Twitter?
I don't. I'm not on Twitter.
Okay, well,
I don't.
Twitter, he's not as active recently, I don't think. He curates art exhibitions in the form of tweets that he sends out. He used to send them out almost every day or several times a day, all around a theme or something. Just wonderful.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's worth going on Twitter, or maybe he does the same thing on Instagram, because I just see on his homepage that he's also on Instagram. So I'm going to follow him there, because maybe that's where he's gone with his.
Well, I can make my wife is more social media than me, so I can make my wife show me on Twitter and Instagram. Fabulously
curated stuff that just makes Twitter a joy. So I'm a big fan of that. And I'm definitely going to try this, because this sounds fabulously queer.
It is so queer.
I'm excited now. So you have mission accomplished, Sarah.
Okay, good. Good. I want to hear what you think of it after you read it.
Thank you so much once again. I am delighted to welcome, for her debut appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, Melanie from Barcelona. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
We found each other on Instagram. I noticed what eclectic taste in reading she has, and she has a fabulous blog, which I'm going to call pageturnercliffhanger.com. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So that will be linked in the show notes. Everybody better go check that out, as well as her Instagram. And Melanie has recently read a fascinating sounding graphic. Is it a graphic novel or a graphic? What would you say? It's nonfiction.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, it's a graphic book.
Parts.
It's a graphic book, and it's called Madgermanes, and the author is Birgit Weyhe, and it's translated from the German by Katy Derbyshire, and it's one of the more unusual books I've ever featured on this series, which means that I am as excited as all get out. Melanie, take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, here it is to show everybody. Like Sean just said, it's a curious book because you would call it a graphic novel if you picked it up in the bookshop and you flick through and you see text and wonderful illustrations. And it is a narrative. It follows three characters and their story, but it's all real. So it's more like graphic history or a graphic account of history. At the very start was a little quote which says, this book is a great document.
Okay.
And there is this feeling to it, this weightiness to it as you read, that you're reading something a little unusual and a little bit special. So what is it? Madgermanes is the name of Mozambicans in the 80s who went to work in East Germany. So this is post-Portuguese colonial rule. There's a lot of trouble in Mozambique at the time. And one of the ways to upskill the local Mozambicans was this friendship project with East Germany. So East Germany needed cheap labor and Mozambicans needed to be upskilled. So there was this contract worker program. And the people who volunteered to join it were considered to be the new elite, like the hope for Mozambique in the future. So people joined up to this program young and enthusiastic and full of dreams. They wanted to be architects, engineers, nurses, teachers. But when they arrived in Berlin in the middle of winter, they found themselves in cheap hostel accommodation, and they were basically unskilled labor. So they were building roads, they were in the coal mines, and their dreams were shattered. So how does Birgit know about this? Well, Birgit, the illustrator herself, she's a German illustrator. She herself spent her childhood in Uganda and Kenya. She only got back to Germany as a 19-year-old. And later on, she was traveling around Africa where she herself, she feels at home there, even though she's a German. And she started hearing German speakers in the market. She said, well, how come you guys speak German? And they said, well, we used to live and work in East Germany. And that's how she discovered the Madgermanes, these made in Germany workers. And she began to interview them. And this is the amalgamation of her interviews. So the real life stories are the tales that we find inside this book.
I believe that the protagonists or some of the main characters, they're somewhat fictionalized, but all the experiences are actual, based on real experiences.
That's exactly right.
And so, of course, East Germany is on its last legs. And so then the Berlin Wall falls. And that's when do they all or most of them go back to Mozambique at that time?
Yeah, so the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, and it's a complete disaster for the program, obviously. As you'll see when we talk a little bit about what happens in the story, they lose their legal identity, they lose their legal status. Right. And one of the problems that they face is that the program's contract is that they are only going to be paid 40% of their wages, and 60% will be given back to them when they return to Mozambique at the end of the contract. But it never is. So this is why it's still a hot issue today. Two of the characters go back. They're basically forced to go back. They've got no money, there's no hope. And the racism that's in Berlin and in Germany just makes it's just untenable for them. Right. Now, one of the characters remains, and that's the one female character, Annabella. And her story is the real kind of beating heart of the book. And you read it with goosebumps. It's very affecting. But she sticks it out. And her story it's positive, it's happy and sad together. But, her story is illustrating, the plight and lives of those who did stay. So there's the balance of, all accounts are presented. Most of the story is set in Berlin, but when the Berlin Wall falls, we then see what happens to the three characters. So the three characters, Jose, Basilio, and Annabella, they all have completely different experiences. Again, because they represent the amalgamation of all the interviews that Birgit made. We follow what happens to them after the Berlin Wall falls. Again, the two men go back, and it's super interesting actually, because these are young guys. Jose at the beginning, he's only 18 years old. They want to be cool. They want to have a nice time. They want to meet girls, but they're under curfew. They're not permitted to. In a way, their youth is sort of robbed. Yeah. But Basilio, the playboy character, he takes a lot of photographs of himself just in front of some random person's car, and they swap clothes together, so it appears that he has many outfits, and he's sending all these photographs home. There's a funny little clip where he's pretending to be David Hasselhoff in Knight Rider, and he's kind of perched on the bonnet of a car looking smooth. Now, when the Berlin Wall falls and these heroes, this new elite go home, the locals who've remained think these are, the rich new returnees. And they don't believe that the wages haven't been paid. And so they're saying like, hey, it's hard over here. Give us some money, civil war, I'm broke, lend us some money, help me start my business. And they're saying like, I'm broke, I haven't been paid. And so they're seen as being draft dodgers because they missed the war. Because they missed the war, they don't really have shared experiences anymore. So when the characters go home, they find their families are destroyed. Everything's different.
Some of the themes from what you're saying sound like it's about, expatriation and then coming back home and identity. Am I German? Am I Mozambican? So those are some of the big themes.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yes. Identity and alienation living abroad is the heart of the book. Yeah. In fact, the book it introduces the three narratives with questions, these sort of existential general questions. Who am I? What is home? What does it mean to be abroad? Am I happy? What am I doing? What's memory? What do you do if you don't want to remember? How do you handle that? So big general themes, but then they're handled in these personal stories of the three characters. So it feels very private, and the narratives are all first person. So you have this confessional, intimate tone. And again, like I mentioned, when you get to Annabella's, you know that something awful happens to her, and you're upset in a way. You feel the fear of what's going to come. But it's because Birgit has done such a good job of turning like a period of history into these three personal stories
that you can't help but get really invested in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Show us some of the art. Show us some of the pages.
All right. I've marked a few. This one is full page art there. Right. That is homesickness.
Disco Cola.
I mean, just a quick point. One of the things which is really striking about this book is the artwork, of course, as a graphic novel. But because Birgit takes East German propaganda and she smashes it in with African art, you get this really unusual
fusion.
Yes.
Wow.
Falling in love. A lot of them are this sort of naive style. But I thought that was quite, it was a great tactical choice because you don't get, there's a frankness to the simple lines. And again, with the way that they speak, it's short little speech bubbles. Because it's first person, it's this diary sort of feeling.
And do these characters know each other?
They do, and that's another really exciting part of the book. So the characters, Jose, Basilio, and Annabella, they don't know each other when they arrive. And the book is basically divided into the three narratives. but they meet each other within their stories. And so you see the same sort of events, but from these three different points of view. But what's interesting is they don't necessarily tell the events in quite the same way. So as you're getting the three character stories, you're also getting a deeper understanding of the one narrative, of the one experience.
Wow, it sounds amazing. It just came out at the beginning of the month in English, according to Goodreads, by V&Q Books. And
Yes.
I will be looking that up pronto. You have done a fabulous job of selling me on it. And I'm sure many of my viewers, Melanie, this is fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.